My clock says it's 7 o'clock. Would other people agree that it's 7 o'clock? I'm a really big believer in, not penalizing people who are on time, but rather other people can join in as they're able, because sometimes people hope to be there by 7, but it doesn't work out. So I just like to welcome everybody who's joined us, and I'd like to welcome you to this panel on granting information and opportunities. And I was mentioning, this is just one of several workshops, which is part of Soundcheck for Success, which runs all week. And this is all part of the Forest City London Music Awards week, which also has fantastic awards events, presentations. Continuing on Thursday, they started on Sunday last night, and it was very exciting. But just check the website for all the details, and all the Soundcheck for Success workshops are free of charge. And there's some really, really interesting ones. Well, every year there are, but this year I'm particularly interested in some of them. So I'll just introduce myself, just because you're wondering why am I doing the one doing the talking. My name's Sheila Simpson, and I had almost 18 years of working at the Ontario Trillium Foundation, a grant-making organization that many of you may be aware of. So I read my share of grant submissions, probably several thousand over the years. And now with my business, which works at helping nonprofits, I've written many, many grants. So I'm kind of have both sides, and I'm very sympathetic to anyone wanting to apply. There's lots of challenges to it, but there's lots of ways that you can make it be less challenging. And before introducing our panelists, then I just want to outline how the call will proceed. So you're all muted, and that's to cut down on background noise, like dogs barking and screaming and all that kind of stuff. And however, your voice is not silenced. You'll see a Q&A button on the bottom of near the bottom of your screen. And so if you use that space, you click on there, and then you can post any questions or say points of clarification you want to hear from panelists, and we'll do our level best to get to them all, depending on how many come in, how engaged you are. There's also a chat function available, and I'll be posting links there when each of the funders is speaking, links to their particular organization or their programs. And you can also post thoughts there, either to everyone on the call or to specific individuals. But don't post your questions in there, because I'm not going to be monitoring that as closely as I am the Q&A section. So we may miss your question if it goes in there. So we have an amazing lineup of panelists here tonight to be with us tonight. So I'll start. I don't know whether you see us all in the same order that I do, but I'll start with the way that I see the tiles lining up. So we've got Karina Moldovan from Factor. We have Jessica Deljurovesh from Ontario Arts Council. We have Aisha Wickham from Ontario Creates, and we have Rebekah Morrison-Wize from London Arts Council. What an impressive group that we get to hear from, I have to say. We had a bit of a call last week just to kind of get our act together on this whole thing, and I was just kind of blown out of the water by the experience that this panel of 4 represents. It's amazing. So first, we're going to hear from each of the panelists to learn a bit about the programs they're involved in and the types of things they fund. So maybe Rebekah, we'll start with you. You're local to London, so it'll be of particular interest to any of our our London-based folks online. So do you want to maybe start and just provide us with a bit of information about the London Arts Council, what you guys fund, etc.?
Sure. I'm the Development Officer Investments for the London Arts Council, and a very large part of my job is managing the Community Arts Investment Program, which is the municipally funded granting program for the arts and culture community here in London. And through that granting program, we support nonprofit arts organizations, but we also support individual artists and artist collectives across the 5 disciplines. I realize we're focusing on music tonight, so of course, we have supported many bands, many individual artists through recording projects or performances, or just doing research into a project they might like to take on someday. So that granting cycle, well, given this year, it was a bit weird. But it usually opens mid-November with all the links to the applications on our website, with a very early February closing. And we're usually try to have everything wrapped up and be flowing money out to the community by early to mid-May.
And this year, though, was a bit different.
This year it was a bit different. All of the submissions came in on February 21st, and the world shut down 3 weeks later. So what we did was we suspended the process until we started to see things easing up and thinking that, okay, maybe we can get back to some normalcy around here. And rather than have people completely rewrite their submission, we just provided them with an online update form that they could tell us how they were pivoting, upload a new marketing plan if they so wished. They could redo their budget if they wanted. And it worked really smoothly. And we've just finished up with the jurying process. And so we're now in the final stages of flowing money out to the community.
Excellent. Excellent. And okay, so I think we'll move along then, and we'll come back to you, of course, with more details about your program. But Jessica, maybe you next, because you're also from an arts council, but at the provincial level. So your information will be of interest to folks from all over the province, wherever they might be joining us from today.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Jessica Doljerevish. I'm one of 2 music officers at the Ontario Arts Council. We also have 2 program administrators that support the music-specific programs at the OAC, as well as some others. Basically, what OAC is we're an arm's-length agency of the Government of Ontario under the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industries. And we receive our budget, our funding from the Ontario government. And the majority of that gets passed on to artists and arts organizations. We fund Ontario-based individuals who are professional artists. So we have a definition of what that is. So artists who have developed some skill through training and practice, although we'll still very much fund people in their early stages of their career. Also, they need to be recognized by their peers, by others, as being professional. And they have to have a history of public presentation or publication, and seek opportunities for payment for their work, and actively practice their art. So those are sort of the criteria of being a professional artist at the OAC. And certainly for music programs, that means a professional musician. We also fund, similarly to London Arts Council, ad hoc groups and collectives that are made up of those professional Ontario-based artists. So that's often in the music context, bands and ensembles. And also not-for-profit organizations, so anything from music festivals to orchestras, things like that. What we do not fund is we do not fund for-profit entities, at least not directly. So for example, we won't fund music studios, but they certainly may benefit indirectly through some of the grants that we have. So the artist is the applicant, but they may be paying to work with a music studio or another for-profit organization through the grant that they receive. In terms of music-specific programs, I'm going to briefly mention the ones that we have. We have basically 4 that are specifically for music: music creation projects, music recording projects, music production and presentation projects, which is about either live or virtual performance to audiences. And then our Francophone music project, Musique Projet Francophone. We also have many multidisciplinary programs where musicians might also be able to get to support depending on their activity. So for example, our touring program and our market development program are multidisciplinary, but certainly we see lots of musicians and music groups apply to those. I will note that in the context of COVID, those 2 particular ones I just mentioned are temporarily suspended, but they will be reopening again, and there's certainly other ones. So we have also some professional development programs, a program for artists working in communities and schools, providing sort of that collaborative and learning experience and participation in the arts. And we also have a specific fund, the Arts Response Initiative, which is particularly to help artists find new ways of working in the context of COVID-19. So lots of other multidisciplinary programs. And we also have some that are specifically to support some of OAC priority groups, people who come from particular priority groups. So for example, we have an Indigenous arts programs and programs specifically for deaf artists and artists with disabilities and things like that. And most of those programs are multidisciplinary. So not just musicians apply, but certainly musicians would be eligible, or music groups would be eligible. The last thing I'll say before I pass the torch on to the next person is most of our programs are really competitive. So within the music section, at any given deadline, we might be able to fund 12 to 23%, somewhere around there, of the applicants that submit applications. So it is very competitive. And all the information about our programs are on our website, and then contact us when you have questions.
So I just was going to say that I have been posting when both Rebekah and Jessica spoke. I posted links to their websites and to various programs, etc. So that's in the chat function. And I see I've got a question or two coming in the Q&A. So please keep those coming. I'll keep track of them. And after we've heard from the other two panelists about the general information, then we'll move to some questions. So keep those questions coming though. So maybe Aisha, maybe you next, because you're also provincial in scope. So it's kind of the same, well, you fund different things, but it's the same sort of a scope that you have as Jessica.
Similar reach. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and to share a little bit about Ontario Creates. I'm a program consultant for the Ontario Music Office, primarily working on the Ontario Music Investment Fund. So that's a new program that just launched this year. It's evolved out of the Ontario Music Fund, which was launched in 2013-14, the $15 million a year program. Similarly to the OAC, we are a provincially funded agency, an arm's length agency of the Ministry of Heritage, Tourism, Sport, and Cultural Industries. And we have a different focus in terms of our target demographic or our stakeholder group. It's more on the industrial development side. So we're an economic development driven agency, focused more on companies than on individuals. So I'll speak about the programs that we offer for music. Our agency as a whole supports 6 creative industries across Ontario. So in addition to music, we also have funding support and sometimes tax credit support, depending on the sector. Interactive digital media, books, magazines, film, and television. Some have both funding and tax credits, and some are just funding programs. But I'll speak specifically about music. We do have 3 program streams. The first is music creation, which would probably be most relevant to those of you on the call. That is for record labels and music publishers. In that program, we've also built in some flexibility for BIPOC-led companies that might be artist entrepreneurs to qualify as a label, given some of the systemic barriers for particular groups within the Black and Indigenous community in particular. And so that's for a broad range. It's not project-based funding, it's what we call slate-based or activity-based funding. So it's basically funding to support a year-long set of activities that are focused on your company growth. So that's high level on music creation. Music Industry Initiatives is a program that's focused on trade associations primarily, or industry associations that are focused on professional development and industry development to benefit the province as a whole. So member-driven associations primarily that are working on development initiatives for artists across Ontario. And that can be not-for-profit or for-profit, primarily not-for-profit in that stream, but in our other streams, we are for-profit driven, trying to encourage growth and investment in the tax base in the province and to support company development. The third stream is the live music stream, and that's focused on music presenters and promoters who are either presenting concert series or music festivals. And obviously with COVID-19, there's a lot of unsettlement in the industry right now. So we haven't shifted our program objectives. Those maintain the same. However, we're displaying as much flexibility as possible and focusing more on resilience than on sustainability at this time, and trying to support as flexible a range of activities as possible that are going to allow companies to weather this, what we're going through right now with COVID-19. So that's high level, the main 3 programs that we offer through the OMIF, and we can talk more specifics later.
That's great, Aisha. Thank you so much. So last but not least, and I've got a couple questions coming in, which we'll get to. I know one of them was answered by Jessica, but we may put it out to the rest of the folks as well. But also other questions that are coming in, so that's good. Keep those coming. So last but not least, Karina, you're federal in scope, and the other thing is that you're not a government agency, so that's different about you. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about Factor and about you know, what you're all about, kind of how you're organized, and who it is that you fund and what the programs are.
Sure. So hi everybody, I'm Karina. I'm sorry that my background is this instead of like a blank wall, but I have nowhere else to go, so good to look at that really fun.
We're just happy you're with us, Karina. You're just happy.
Yeah, making it work. Okay, so actually we are government funded, half government funded, so it's kind of a unique situation. Factor is public and private. About 50% of our funding, similar with like OAC, comes from the Department of Canadian Heritage, and the other half comes from private radio broadcasters. So we kind of have that that difference there. So we do fund artists primarily across the country in every genre, every single region. I do like mentioning that we are quite different from an arts council because Factor does have a focus, and this part is similar to Ontario Creates, on commercial success and being paid for your work. So commercial success, of course, means a variety of things, and it's different for each artist, but the point is that you're making a work that you're putting out there to hopefully be paid for. So I will mention two of our most popular programs, just kind of a brief overview. I'm sure we'll get into them later. Both of these programs are juried, which means that it's not me or my colleagues that are looking at the applications. It's jury professionals across the country who are experts in music in a particular genre. So the first is artist development, the most popular one. It's also the smallest, but it's very mighty. It's $2,000 and you can use it for pretty much anything. Making a video, recording a single, any kind of marketing campaign, social media campaign, whatever suits your needs in that moment. And I'll talk about what you need to get that later. But the second one is called juried sound recording. And this is a larger grant. So this gives you about $10,000 for the actual sound recording of a full length album. For Factor, full length means it has to be at least 6 songs or 20 minutes long. So not super long, generally an EP. Plus there's an additional $50,000 that's set aside for you to access throughout the life cycle of that project. So that's split into different components: video, marketing, tour, showcase, and radio marketing. And you can use all of them, you can use just one of them. So again, it depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve with that album release. But overall, you can access up to just over $65,000 for that project. They are very, very competitive, I will say. We do get about 2,500 applications across 2 deadlines a year, and we can only fund so much. Of course, the budget limits that. I did pull some numbers just because I know people always ask about success rates. So last year, we put an extra $1 million into these programs, which allowed the success rate to obviously bump up quite a bit. So for example, in artist development, about 38% of the people who applied got funded, and similar JSR, juried sound recording, was 36%. And the total of all of that is about $8 million a year into those 2 programs. I will also bring up that we do have a whole bunch of other programs. We do fund record labels, music distributors, music publishers, songwriters, event organizers, pretty much everybody. And so there are other options besides these 2 for artists to access, but these are kind of, I would say, the best place to start.
And we may have people who would fit those categories on the call today.
Right, yeah. I made some extra notes about, like, if you are an event organizer or you're putting on a festival or a conference like this one, there's definitely options for funding for that as well.
And I mean, usually Soundcheck for Success pulls in producers and, all kinds of the technical side of things as well.
Yep.
So that's great. That's fantastic. So I have a question here that's come in from somebody about what makes an application stand out. So I don't know if anybody who wants to take that on to start with. Jessica, you're smiling. How about you start? Or is there anything that
I'm
makes
always
it stand
smiling.
out? Yeah, I know. I noticed that. It's great.
Well, I will say there's always a different set of eyes on the application. So similarly to what Karina described for Factor, we use a peer assessment process. So there's always different eyes and ears around the table looking at those applications. So sometimes it depends. But the biggest thing you can do to help your ability to have a good shot at those very competitive programs is to provide as much specifics and details as you can. So often when programs are so competitive, if assessors don't have the answer to something, if they don't understand enough about your recording process, who you're working with, or what you're trying to achieve, that's kind of move you out very quickly. So the biggest advice that I can give in terms of making it stand out is not so much making it stand out. Be yourself, share what it is that you want to do, but make sure you are providing that full information to somebody who's reading the application, who very well may not know anything about you, what you do, and what your intentions for the project are. So that's really important. So work ahead and make sure, I often say, have somebody who doesn't know the project read your application and look it over and see if there's any questions that they have for you to help you put together a better application, a stronger application.
Great. Anything you would like to add, Aisha?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica hit on a lot of important points that would be the same for us. We're a little bit different in our assessment process. I can get into the breakdown later when we discuss that, but we are a staff level administered program. So it's not a different set of juries that review the applications. So we tend to have a more intimate, if you will, relationship with our stakeholder group. We find applicants applying year over year. So in our case, it's much more track record based, as well as the thoroughness of the application and the feasibility of what it is you're proposing. You need to be able to have lofty goals, but also be able to speak to your ability to achieve those goals by either providing tangible demonstration that you yourself have done it before, or that somebody that's similar to you in a competitive landscape, that you've done your competitive analysis and based on artists that are similar to you or companies that are similar to you, these are the benchmarks that you feel you can meet. So backing up your statements with data. I also did just want to mention that in terms of volume of applications and success rate, we also vary quite a bit from the other funders because the volume of applications is much lower for us. We're in the low 200s as opposed to over thousands. We have a much higher success rate, but that's because we have a much higher sort of funding cap per application. So we might approve more applicants, but at a lower level. So we try to spread the funding across strong applications based on where they rank. But yeah, in terms of, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, Aisha, I think as well, you as you say, you have that relationship with the people who eventually then apply. So there's a lot of kind of pre-application counseling or conversations that take place. Would that be accurate?
And even for first-time applicants, we strongly encourage them to reach out to us before they apply, both to confirm eligibility, because there are certain criteria you have to meet in terms of incorporation status and revenue thresholds. There's a minimum threshold of $25,000 to access our music creation program. And just talking through sort of, how you're planning to structure the application, we can provide some guidance based on the particular case. So we build those relationships with first-time applicants as well as those that that have been applying year over year to us. And we ask applicants to not assume that we know their track record. We're evaluating what's on the page. So whether you've applied to us 5 times in the past or not, if you're not articulating that clearly in every single application, you'll get assessed on your current application compared to the pool that's applying in that same deadline.
And so just on that note, well, maybe before we leave this, you've brought up the whole assessment process, Aisha. Maybe can others talk about that? Talk about the jurying process. Rebekah, you use that.
Mhm.
And I've had a question from somebody about, the process or the method for recruiting jurors. And this is within specifically those with knowledge on creatives and creative works from the BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. That's become, of course, so relevant for us. And so I think we're all trying to make sure that we're trying to make sure we're much more inclusive and have diverse voices at the table. So I don't know, for those of you who have juries, I'll kind of throw that question up. One, what's the process for recruiting? And then the second piece is about the BIPOC.
So at the London Arts Council, we keep an open expression of interest on our investment webpage. And so potential jury members can identify themselves there. They do have to supply us with a resume, tell us what discipline of the arts they have expertise in, have they ever juried before, what do they know about granting processes. And we keep that open all year so that people can submit. With regard to BIPOC and jurying, I think, and we've been discussing this because I know with our applications, we don't have a self-identification form that I believe OAC does, and it's your option if you want to fill it out or not. We are planning on doing some consulting out in the community with the arts community and asking if they would like to have that. And again, we would have it be, it's optional. You can self-identify or not. And we'll be working that into the expression of interest for the jury members as well. We use 3-member juries in all our disciplines, and they are given a rubric with which to work from, very close to what the OAC uses. And we also use a ranking system. So I read all of the applications that come in, but I have no decision making around the grants at all. That's completely decided by the jury. And we did all our jury Zoom meetings, and you have to be scoring over a 75% for the jury to consider you for funding. And then quite often it's a matter of, somebody may have scored very close and the jury really does like their project, and then they sort of adjust dollar levels as they go. But certainly it is jury decided. We do offer consultation prior to. We also suggest anybody who's applying come in and talk to a staff member first to, again, gauge your eligibility, make sure you're meeting the guidelines, just talk your project through a little bit, because we can give you advice right at the get-go. And anybody who's applied in the past and has either been successful or unsuccessful, again, it's best to consult and talk to the program officer before submitting. And we do offer feedback after all dust has settled. So people can come in and get some feedback as to maybe the little things that just, sort of knocked them out of the running, and quite often it's heartbreaking, but I just have to say, I'm sorry, we just did not have enough funding.
So in terms of your jury recruitment, then it's a like people self-identify, or do you have any are you out there kind of like recruiting or
Not
advertising or
really,
wherever it be?
but we do excuse me, ask jury members to recommend other people they know who they think might be good jury members. Our board of directors is always on the lookout for to direct people towards us to be part of the program, because we do jurying in some of our other programs as well. So we rely on juries a lot.
Okay. And how about you, Jessica? I know that Rebekah mentioned several times that they've modeled many things off the Ontario Arts Council and also some slight differences. So tell us about your jury selection, how you go about it, and how you recruit.
Absolutely. So ultimately, it's the program officer's responsibility to select a group of assessors. It's different at every single deadline. So we're always looking for new faces, new people to be involved in that process. We do have a public forum available on our website where people can put themselves forward. But it is, I will say, one of the very difficult and tough parts of our job, because we look at the applications that have come in a particular deadline, and we select assessors that can represent as broad as possible a range of what we see in those applications. In programs like our recording program, we don't have, unlike Factor, we are not divided into genre-specific groups. I think that's still how it works at Factor, but I know Karina would speak to it more. OAC it's one music recording program, one music creation program, and we'll get everything from children's music to folk to hip hop to orchestral music to opera, the whole, you name it, we've seen it, we've probably funded it at some point. So it's all in one, all comes in together, and it's all assessed together. And I know that sounds funny, but it actually really works. And we do tend to choose assessors that bring in a broad range of knowledge and experience. So for example, for a recording program, we might have somebody who has a bit more in studio type experience, whereas other artists maybe more experience in particular genres. We are absolutely looking for a broad representation in terms of cultural perspectives that they're bringing to the table, and also from across Ontario. So we are conscious and considerate when we're selecting a group of assessors. We typically have about 5 for each deadline. So at one deadline, we're not going to be able to cover everything, and everything in terms of genre, everything's in terms of region and diversity. But over a period of time, we make very strong efforts and keep track of how we're doing in terms of ensuring that we do have Indigenous artists, artists of color, certainly Black artists, artists from the different regions across Ontario, deaf artists and artists with disabilities, Francophone artists. So that's all part of what comes into the decision making when we're selecting assessors. Yes, I'm definitely looking at names that are suggested to me or that come in. I'm also, part of my responsibility is knowing what's happening in the field and keeping an eye on what's going on. Certainly sometimes we'll have assessors come in who have received grants before from OAC. Sometimes we're calling on people who their organizations may have been funded, but they themselves have never applied. So it's quite a range of people that we have. And we do post the information after each deadline, who the assessors were, where they come from, the regions they come from across Ontario. And that's information we share along with the list of successful applicants. I don't know that I've touched on everything.
Yeah, no, so it sounds like you're very cognizant of trying to make sure diverse voices are there. So in terms of BIPOC, that you've been working on this for quite a while.
Yeah, that's part of built into our strategic plan that OAC has been working with. So it's very much built into our processes, and also within when we're leading. So as a program officer, we're leading that discussion around the table of those assessors. So we're looking for how applications are treated in an equitable manner, and if there are things that are not raised that from a sectoral perspective or a particular cultural or practice perspective of a particular practice need to be brought up, we'll bring that to the table and ask questions of those assessors. So we're very much involved in the process, but ultimately the assessors make those decisions.
That's excellent. Okay, and Karina, I know that I'm trying to remember what you said now. One of your programs is juried and the other one maybe not. I'm not sure.
No, they're both juried. So
They're
the
both
two juried programs are juried. Of course, we rely on them quite a bit. I mean, we have 1,800 jurors across the country.
Wow.
So our jury recruitment is pretty, I want to say robust, but it should be significantly more. So we do have a whole outreach department. We have a jury supervisor who's completely in charge of all the juries. So we tend to try to look at our, how many, like which genre is the most, or like the most underfunded. So for example, reggae, rap, like those are ones that are notoriously have a really hard time with factor, and it's the resources aren't there. So we need more jurors to all from those genres to also be part of the juror pool to be able to encourage more applications and have them look at it. So yeah, there's a pretty in-depth jury recruitment process. People can apply similar to OAC. So you go online, there's a form. It's pretty much like putting up your like CV, but with your music industry experience to say, this is what I've done, this is why I would be a good juror, and then the jury supervisor will look at that. Our rules are you have to have at least 5 years experience in the music industry in your particular genre and be active for the past 2 years. So not because you did something 20 years ago, but haven't done anything in the past. Like we need people to be current and up to date with what's happening now so they can properly assess. So yeah, they're pretty important. Of course, it's also hard because they are volunteers and we give them a lot of work. And unfortunately, there's just too many of them to give them compensation. So I know that gets a little bit frustrating, and that topic comes up a lot. So it's not that every round 1,800 jurors participate, right? You have the option, you can opt in and out if you're available for that round to look at the assessments. And then those scores come in and they're very as objective as they could be. Score out of 25 for each section. And we do give everybody their feedback, comments, scores that come through at the end, whether you got the grant or not.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Now, a couple of questions here that I received. There's a couple of specific questions, but maybe I'll leave those for a bit. But how important is it to show that a project team is able to raise money or support in kind, like in addition to the grant being requested? Do you have kind of a formula or anything like that? Like some funders in some areas don't provide 100% of funding, they require matching funding, et cetera. Do any of you have that sort of situation?
We don't have a formula, but it is very clearly stated that you have to be showing investment coming from somewhere else. Honestly, even if I don't like people to do this, but if it's going to get your budget looked at, if you need to put in individual donations $500, you don't need to tell us if it's your own money, but it would be showing in your budget, and it tells us that yes, you are bringing investment to this project from somewhere else. We've had a lot of GoFundMe campaigns that are shown in the projects, but we definitely, people still sometimes get 100% of their request, but we want to make sure that we're not the only players coming to the table.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. You want to make sure there's some community support or support from somewhere. Yes. And would that be similar to the rest of you?
For factor, it's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Karina, please.
We fund 75% in all programs, so you need to come up with the other 25%. You don't need to show us how, don't really care. And I think at some point, I don't know if we will be asked this, but we do encourage people to apply to different organizations, right? Like you can get funding from OAC and Factor at the same time. The point is you just can't be profiting, right? So public funding policy is you can't have it exceed 100% of your costs. But if you went to OAC and paid for the stuff that you didn't use Factor money for, like that's great. We're happy to see that. You do have to disclose it, but we do encourage you to use multiple funding sources.
Yeah.
Okay, and how about you, Aisha, for matching funding or anything?
Yeah, we're very formulaic. We do welcome other public funders. We have a 50-50 matching funding, and your funding cannot exceed 75% publicly funded from any public source. So between us and other public funders, it cannot exceed 75% of your budget. So you have to self-fund 25%, either on your own or through a third-party source of funding that you can bring to the table. We're unique in terms of how we determine how much you can apply for. The maximum cap in music creation, and it's a big number, but it's based on the breadth of companies that can apply. So major labels up to down to the smallest $25,000 company can apply for up to $350,000 for the year. However, your individual company application is determined based on what's 40% of your company's revenues averaged over the past 2 fiscal years. So based on your last 2 completed years of operation, you have your financial statements prepared, you take the revenue from those 2 years, average the 2 together, and 40% of that is the maximum you can request from the OMIF. So we do that in terms of creating a formula for you to determine what's a reasonable capacity for your overall budget, given that you have to come to the table with a portion of that. So 40% was the amount we arrived at in terms of the maximum that you can apply for.
How about you, Jessica?
Depends. So it depends on the program. So there's specific requirements depending on the program you're applying to. So we have some where we simply say you must have diverse sources of revenue. So we don't necessarily, in the music specific programs at least, we don't necessarily have specific targets, but you have to look at the specific context of the project you're applying for. So there might be a high level grant amount that you're able to request, but you have to keep in mind that that program might fund everything from a small individual project to one for a larger organization. So you need to look at the context for your project. And in some cases, you do need to have other source of revenues, but it's not a requirement in all. We always encourage it, but we also recognize that in some cases it isn't possible. It doesn't make sense for a variety of reasons, especially projects led by individuals, where that is less feasible. I will say the expectation for some larger groups or collectives or not-for-profit organizations would be that there's something, depending again on the nature of the activity. So if you're putting a performance, if your intention is to have a free performance, you're not necessarily going to get revenues from that, but maybe you get it from some sponsorships or other things, or maybe you are getting ticket sales or selling advertising and things like that. So it really does depend on the program.
That's great.
But
okay.
it's not a flat out, it's not a requirement in all our programs.
Yeah. Okay,
but
so
often the assessors will ask if they go, oh, this is exactly the type of thing that Factor funds or Canada Council funds. Sometimes they may wonder why an applicant hasn't applied if there's a sort of logical place that they could have gone to.
So that brings me to another question that I had, which is you all fund music. So how do people know who to apply to? Like, how do they decide? And Karina, you mentioned about, we encourage people to apply to more than one place. We can co-fund. I don't know, does anybody want to speak a little bit more to that? Jessica, you were excited about that question?
I alluded to it. I mean, again, the assessors want to know that you sort of have, that you know what you're doing. I mean, you're assessed with OAC on 3 main criteria: artistic merit, impact, and viability. And viability is all about the budget and how you're organizing your project, and knowing who you can go to for funding support and what other resources are available to you is absolutely part and parcel of that, or it can be. Again, depending on the nature of the project and how much money you're looking for. If it's a smaller project, maybe not, but if it's a big one, then yeah, often it makes sense.
It's called stacking funds, actually. Or at least that's how I refer to it.
And
I'm
there's
sorry, go ahead.
there's some as we're hearing, projects that these two agencies might have the same eligible expenses, and there's some where we're actually funding different elements maybe of the same project. So we often see people go to Factor for some of the heavier costs related to marketing their recording and things like that, where OAC might be a smaller contribution to that, and are more focused on the actual recording of the album and costs related to that. So we often see that in applications, and that's perfectly fine. And so you might, and we have spots to include that type of information in OAC's application in our budget.
And that speaks to how important it is for anybody who wants to write a grant application to really clearly read and reread the guidelines and understand exactly what OAC funds and what their priorities are as compared to Factor, as perhaps compared to the local Arts Council or Ontario Creates. Really understand what those what it is that each of you fund and what the areas are. Aisha, were you going to get in on this one?
I was just going to speak briefly to the assessment criteria, because Jessica touched on it as well. And just, you know, when the OMF was launched, the idea was to fill gaps in the funding system. Not that there really were many, but, you know, things like HR capacity expansion and certain aspects of export development and hiring in-market specialists in other regions around the world are things that are a bit more unique to our mandate, which is trying to drive commercial success on a global level for Ontario-based artists and companies. So our assessment criteria, to your question of sort of how do people know where to focus, I'll just run through ours, and it kind of indicates the importance of the economic aspect for us in our assessment. So 10% is based on your track record and you demonstrating that you've got the background to carry out the budget that you're proposing. What is the financial risk in the government investing in your project? Do you have a healthy financial history? Are you a stable business? The overall proposal is worth 25%. So that's basically a bucket to say, you know, how well written, how thorough, how well presented, how logical is your proposal. Economic and cultural impact is worth 20%. So that's a metric that is somewhat subjective, but also objective. We're looking for commercial success through sales, live performance revenue, and that's the thing again. But also cultural impact for especially Indigenous and Francophone companies. Resilience and sustainability. Resilience we added this year, obviously due to COVID, that's worth 15%. Support for emerging talent is 10%, and diversity and inclusion is 10%. So when you're submitting an application to us, those are the metrics that we're scoring applications. Again, comparatively and competitively. So it is a process where like-sized companies are being compared against each other in an assessment process.
That's very helpful, Aisha. And I think that for most of you, your assessment criteria are available for people. It's not a secret, not some deep, dark secret somewhere. Most of you at least publish the assessment criteria. And I would certainly encourage anybody who, before they start writing a grant, to really become familiar with that assessment criteria, because you could be spending a whole lot of time and energy on an area that doesn't really count for too much, and maybe not enough energy on the areas that receive a higher score or have a greater percentage. So that's great. I have a question here about revenue thresholds for eligibility. I know it varies from program to program. By that, they mean, you know, in some cases, I know, Aisha, especially at Ontario Creates, there are particular programs, because they're aimed at industry, where you already have to have a budget of, I don't know, 100,000 or 80,000 or whatever it is. I don't even know what the numbers are. And so is that true of most of your programs for any of you? Jessica, no? Do you have revenue thresholds at all?
We do, but only for our operating programs, and I haven't talked about any of those here. So for most of our project programs, no. And we fund projects of all scopes and sizes.
Okay, so it could be a very small organization, basically kind of starting out, so long as they're defined as professional, and we'll get back to that in a sec. Karina, any revenue thresholds on yours?
Not for artists in these project kind of programs, but if you are, we do get a lot of, just two people who are like, I want to run a record label and I have 2 artists and I'm ready to go. That's not going to be enough to access that business support, the industry support. So we do have, you have to be in business for at least 2 years. Is kind of the basic, and then from there there's different levels of ratings that you can get as a company, and those do have revenue thresholds. It's a pretty complicated little system. There's a guide, one sheet for each kind of company that we do have available, so you can see what you could be kind of working towards if it's something that you plan to do, so that the moment you are ready for factor funding to come to us. So it's good to look at it ahead of time. So yeah, there are for that, but not for artists accessing many of the programs I've talked about.
Excellent. And Rebekah, I'm pretty sure not from you guys, not from your community granting.
Not for individuals or collectives. There is one stream within the annual arts organizations that they have to maintain a certain revenue.
Sure. Yeah. But those are ongoing kind of grants as opposed to these kind of, and Aisha, I know it varies from program to program, and it depends on how well developed that industry is or whatever, I presume. So
yeah, I mean, our live music stream hasn't launched yet for this particular year, so I can't speak to numbers there, but typically we lowered the minimum threshold this year. It used to be 35,000 and now it's 25,000. So that's the door to entry. For BIPOC or other diverse companies, we have exceptions where based on the particular case, if it's a high potential, but they're not quite at that level yet, we can certainly welcome an application, even if all of the criteria for eligibility have not yet been met. But yeah, your minimum request cannot be lower than 10,000. So 10,000 is 40% of 25,000. So basically we're looking for a company that's kind of getting rolling in terms of its sustainability as sort of the door to entry. So, looking at the arts councils to get rolling in terms of funding some of your projects and then building towards more of the company side, because obviously incorporation involves a layer of administration that's not necessarily worth it for everybody, and not everybody wants to go down that road or can go down that road. So yeah, it's important to really review the guidelines and understand where the best fit is for you and what your trajectory or what you want your trajectory to be.
Okay, so I've got kind of popcorn questions here. They're specific to folks. So Rebekah, will the London Arts Council be starting back up the grant application in November for 2021? Do you know yet? Do you have a crystal ball?
I don't have the crystal ball. I've had a couple of people email in asking, and I've said this is what typically happens. But given the atypical year we just had, and we're just coming out of the cycle, I couldn't say for sure, but that's traditionally when it opens is mid-November. Okay. And everything's done online from links from our website, and typically it's a February deadline.
So stay tuned, basically.
Yeah.
Like we are with everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, maybe that one got answered. Does anybody fund podcasts that interview music industry professionals?
Yes, sometimes. So
okay, Factor might?
Yeah, it's real specific. So we do have a program called sponsorship, which is kind of like a catch-all for all of the stuff that doesn't fit into the other programs. For example, the way we fund the Junos, that goes into a really specific category of industry events. So we have these kind of set categories, but for all the stuff that's starting out, smaller events, go in there, small festivals, and podcasts we have funded in the past. It's not really in our rules, but if you make a really good case for it and you submit a letter of intent anyways, it could make it through. So the fact that it's happened before means it very well could happen again. The thing that we look at most for sponsorship is the focus on, it can't just be benefiting one artist, right? So if the point is that you're going to interview music industry professionals from different areas and different parts of the industry for the benefit of this community, I mean, podcasts obviously would be accessible to everybody. That's great. So that kind of meets that requirement. If it serves a community that is currently underserved, Black-owned businesses, things like that, like we don't really want another rock festival. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares about that anymore. Let's be very honest. Like we need things that are a little bit more different. So if you have something that's stands out and does benefit a lot of artists and you think you can really make it work, yes, it's definitely something that we would consider. And there's a lot of kind of flexibility and sponsorship like that. And I would highly recommend anybody that's looking to do kind of a unique project to look at that program.
So composers, are they eligible for classic compositions and new works? So Ontario Arts Council, yay. London Arts Council, yay. Factor, probably yay. Probably not Ontario Creates. Okay, so there you go. So there are some options for that. And again, as each of the presenters has said, there's all kinds of resources online, and then there's people you can talk to too. And there's information sessions that all of these organizations provide as well. So keep online looking for that sort of thing. Could a music studio fall under Factor sponsorships?
No, unfortunately not. So we don't fund recording studios. We won't just kind of fund a business and its regular operations. It's not what Factor does. So if the owner of that recording studio has decided to do, provide free workshops to this many artists and promote, do something for the community, yes, then it's possible, right? So it's again, project-based and not business-based. We won't fund things like that.
Does anyone fund any musical theater productions? Yes, Ontario Arts Council?
We do. Actually, most of that is usually funded through our theater program. So not actually in our music program. Depends, it's worth having a conversation. Depends sort of what phase your activity is. We might fund a recording of that music, but typically a production of that would go to our theater. If it's more in the sort of opera vein, then it tends to come to our music programs. But yes, we do fund it.
And we're all saying it depends a lot, but don't take that as a negative. It's because all of these programs are so flexible and there's so many different variations and everybody's different who's coming, right? Rebekah, do you guys fund musical theater productions?
We do. We would put them in our performance category with theater, spoken word, and dance.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure.
You mentioned something about contacting us. So I think it's probably worth everybody talking about sort of how we work and how we communicate with people. I think Aisha sort of mentioned that close relationship, but it's a little bit different for each organization. Yes. So definitely get in touch with us if you don't know where to go. Send us an email. We'll send you links to where to start, but don't come to us and expect us to be able to spend an hour with you having a full discussion about where you may or may not fit. We just simply don't have the resources and time to do that. I mentioned our small staff at the beginning, so it is small for the number of applications we're dealing with. So we'll often send you as an initial conversation. You might say, I have this project, where might it fit? We might send you links and things to look at. So do make sure you look at those and review those. And if you have questions, come back to us, absolutely. But we're not going to spend a time like we are today with each individual person asking questions. So you do have to do your homework, and you do have to understand the way and read up on how applications are assessed and think about very often you won't have the same, you may have some of the same information in your application to Factor or to Ontario Creates and OAC, but it's probably not going to be the same application because we are looking at different assessment and things like that. Right. So make sure you do look at the information that is available on our website, contact us with specific questions so that when you do have some time with us, we can give you as specific and helpful and useful answers as possible. Mm-hmm. But we just don't have the resources to be able to walk you step by step through everything. And we do provide feedback for many and most of our programs at the Ontario Arts Council, but it's going to be limited. It's going to be, we do provide phone, it's verbal feedback that we provide, not written feedback at OAC. And you book a time with a program officer. If you didn't get a grant, or even if you did get a grant, you can get feedback on a past application, but it's going to be limited. And it's not about explaining why you didn't get a grant. It's about how can you help improve on improve your chances of getting a grant.
That's great. Thanks,
But
Jessica.
I think, again, it's different with Factor and others, so it's worth
Yeah.
mentioning.
So I'll turn to Karina now with Factor. So can people just phone you up, Karina, or is there a better?
They can, but similarly, I mean, we have a staff of, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We have a staff of 20 people for literally the entire country, which is pretty tough. So in terms of the way it works is once you sign up in the Factor system, you get assigned to a project coordinator. Project coordinators, we have like 7 of them for the entire country. So they have a very, very large roster of artists that they're responsible for. So they are there to help guide you through the process. They kind of administer your project with you and for you. But again, you can't call them up and just say, can you tell me about all your programs? No, like you got to figure out what do you need and want, and then we can help direct you towards what you should read. So we do expect that you come in with some basic understanding. Even just if you attended this and you found out that there's an artist development program and it's $2,000, great, go look it up and see exactly what you can do with it. And then you end up at the project coordinator stage. And if you have specific questions, yeah, they can definitely help you. Email, call them up. Like that's their job, 24/7, not 24/7. I don't know why I said that. Like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. They're there to help you, but there is an understanding that you should sort of know what you're working towards a little bit, and then you can ask specific questions, not just like a blanket, tell me what's up with Factor.
Yeah.
But we do recommend you keep in touch, not to scare people away from talking to us. We really encourage it. And we do recommend attending. We do info sessions that are like an hour and a half, super in-depth, how the program works. I'll show you the website, the portal, how do you make a profile? Like I'll go through it really, really in detail. And those are free and online right now anyways. So I recommend you keep an eye out on our website to sign up for those, and they help a lot.
That's great. And most funders do those as well, because it's a way to get the information out there without having to have that, without trying to deal with those one-on-ones. Rebekah, you have pretty, you connect with, or you encourage people to connect with you before they apply, right?
Yes, we do. And we hold information sessions as well, like just large open sessions. We'll do usually one session for nonprofit arts organizations and then 2 sessions for individual artists and artist collectives. In the past, up until this most current year, it was myself and myself only that met with potential applicants, which I never got anything else done. So during that period, but we were very, very fortunate this year that we had more staff for a while, but that everybody who works at the Arts Council comes from an artistic background and has artistic training themselves. And so we were very focused on, okay, this staff member is a visual artist. You meet with the people who are coming forward in the visual art discipline. We have another staff member who has a background in theater and music. My background is dance. We had a musician. So this year it was so much easier by divvying up all of the consultations. But we do ask, if you're the same as what Jessica said, if you're coming in to meet, please have already looked over all the documentation, have your project in your mind, what you would like to do, because I'm kind of at a loss when people come in and sit down and go, I want to apply for funding, what should I do? And they're meaning like, what's my project? And I'm like, I can't choose your project for you. You have to come forward with a project. So.
And Aisha, you mentioned earlier that you've got a fairly deep relationship with folks. So I know personally that I've phoned and had conversations and talked about projects ahead of time, and that's very helpful.
Yeah, as I said before, we don't have the large volume of individual one-to-one applicants. We're provincial as well, so we have a team of 7, 3 program consultants, 2 program coordinators, a manager, and a financial officer. And we do encourage companies that have done the homework in terms of understanding where they would fit or if they're eligible as best they can determine before reaching out to us. But yeah, we do stress that we are public servants. We're here to serve the community. But you know, it's wasting either of our time if the homework hasn't been done before coming to the table. So we want to make sure we can give you advice to help you move along forward rather than sort of going over the 101s with you. So yeah, don't be shy to approach us, but come with something that can be meaningful for you in helping advance you further on the path.
Okay, so I've got two more quick questions, and then I'm going to have a final question here. We're already past the hour, so obviously people are very engaged. A question has come in. I'm not sure if I quite understand it, but would you say that as an independent artist registering for an official business license, it would fall under a publishing license? I'm no lawyer.
I answered that in text, but maybe other
Okay.
people.
I
So
missed that
first
then.
of all, for a factor, you don't need to be a business to apply, so it's not necessary. A publishing license is a very different thing. It's not really a business license. So I would say if you're an independent artist, you would just register yourself as a business and you're a sole proprietor. And that's kind of it. So publishing license is like down the line when you have like a publishing deal with somebody for your work. So I don't know if that's what the question is, but that was sort of my answer.
Thank you. I missed that you would answer that. Thank you, Karina. And then the other one here is, how many times could an application be submitted? Is there a limit on the number of submissions for a particular project application? And I would think that would vary. Anybody want to answer that? So I think that means the same application being submitted more than once.
Yeah, I'll start because I'm unmuted. And I really do want to mention that we have some pretty stringent rules around our deadlines for the juried programs. So we have two of them. The next deadline is October 29th for juried sound recording and November 12th for artist development. But you cannot apply to both. So you have to pick one and only one. And you can only apply to one of those programs once per year. So if you apply to artist development in November and you don't get it, you cannot apply to anything until next November. You won't be able to apply to the May round of deadlines to either program, even if it's the one you didn't apply to in November. So that's why we really want people to read those guidelines and do their homework and understand which program suits their project the best, because unfortunately, with how competitive it is, and if you don't get it, which is okay, like we do want you to keep trying, but you do have to wait a full year.
Yeah.
And we do expect that naturally within a year, if you come back to apply again, your project will have probably changed. A lot of people will do the project regardless if the factor funding comes through or not. But if you are dependent on it, or I assume you'd probably get funding from other places, you can't just kind of resubmit. So the project will be wiped from the system. You can't just like change the date and hit send again. So we do expect that a different version of the project comes through the next time, so that you're not just hitting the same thing every single time.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else want to jump in on this one? Limit on the numbers? Jessica?
So Sheila did share in the chat a link to our guide to OEC project programs. So that provides some information about restrictions about applying to OEC. So have a look at that. But essentially, in theory, you can. So we won't fund the same project twice. But let's say you apply to the creation program and then you're applying to the recording program. Those would actually be considered two phases of the same project. So you can apply to both and also apply to our presentation one as well. But you can only receive up to 3 grants a year. So there's restrictions about how that works practically in terms of submitting applications. And if you're not successful, as long as your project continues to meet the eligibility of the program, you can apply with the same project at the next deadline. You still have to create a new application. You can certainly transfer some of that information over from your past application, but you probably do want to get some feedback and make some updates and changes to it. But hopefully that mostly answers the question.
Yeah, and I think as in most of these questions, that we keep coming back and harping on this, I know, but read the guidelines and understand what the rules are, because it is going to be different from funder to funder to funder and from program to program. So that's really, maybe if there's a takeaway today, is like, make sure you're really clear on what it is the funder is wanting to fund and what their rules are. and their rules are their rules, and there's a reason they exist. So just take your time and do your homework. I guess I just want to sort of close this down because we're past 8 o'clock already. Oh, wait a minute, I've got another question here. What's this? Is there a central place where all the Canadian funders are listed? You know, you can go to Charity Village, and that provides lots of lists. You can type into your Google bar federal grant opportunities, and you'll get a whole list. You can type in, what's it called in Ontario? Ontario Grants Ontario, and that a lot of the funders fund through there.
I'll chime in that we actually have a guide for this on the Factor website.
Oh, do you? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
it's called Guide to Music Funding. So we split it up into national, provincial, and territorial. It doesn't get more local than that. But yeah, we've laid out a whole document that kind of shows you the different funding options across the country, depending on what you're looking at. Music specific, of course.
Well, there you go. That's fantastic. So just one, like a last word for each of you. What's the one thing that you want to, you know, piece of advice, or the one tip, or the one whatever you want to provide to all of these great folks who've been online with us, starting maybe with you, Aisha?
I think I would say, you know, as we talked throughout around just preparation and planning ahead, the turnaround time on most of the decisions ranges from 3 to 4 months. So, you want to be thinking way ahead. That's often difficult to do, especially with planning tours and that type of thing. But, you know, think of it as a year-long project, and really try to get the ideas out of your head and onto the paper about where you see yourself 6 to 12 months from now. And to manage your expectations around, you know, recognizing how competitive the process is, and not getting, you know, turned off of the process with 1 or even 2 or 3 rejections. It's, you know, these entities are around year over year over year, and it's about really just being determined to find the right path for what it is you're doing. Obviously, the talent has to be there. That's number one. And in our case, the business model has to be strong. If those 2 things are in place, then it really just is about engaging with the agencies to find out what tweaks you need to make if you are unsuccessful, and continuing to be determined about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Aisha. Karina, any last words you want to leave people with?
Sure. I think Aisha's point is like number 1 for all grant stuff. Plan ahead. Yeah. These deadlines aren't every week. They're not suited for your, you know, whims. So you really do have to plan ahead. I will say that for Factor, you might think that your song is the best song ever, but you really do need to have a solid marketing plan, and that you need to have that balance of both. Having a plan in place and how you're going to kind of make money from that plan, and the talent, yes, and the music does have to be there, but don't mix up writing a grant for an arts council and for Ontario Creates or Factor, right? Like they do have different mandates. Yeah. As much as it's really boring to read through that kind of stuff on a website, I think it's really important to understand the funder that you're applying to and what they're exactly looking for, even in like just a general overall scope, not for your exact program, right? So like, what does Factor want? Lastly, I'll be quick, but we do have a section on the site that shows recipients. So I really highly recommend that people look up other recipients. Maybe it's someone in your community, talk to other artists or people that you're surrounded by, reach out to them and say, what did you do to get this grant? Or do you have any tips? Because they're the people that are going to know the best, and give you the most firsthand information. This is how I wrote my marketing plan, because we get a lot of requests. Can I see an example? Like, no, we can't. So go find those people yourself and ask them to see if they're willing to share that with you. I think that's
and I always encourage people to do that too, to get a bit of a sense of who's been funded, because, you know, if everybody who's been funded has been funded at kind of the 10,000 level, then it's probably silly to be going and asking for 70, you know, like it's, or whatever, or if it looks like a certain sort of demographics or whatever, then you probably should learn from that. Anything else to add, Jessica or Rebekah?
We do have our past recipients on our website as well. And of course, they're all London artists. So they'd be fabulous resource for anybody possibly wanting to apply to the Community Arts Investment Program. I would just echo everything that's been said here. The one thing I do want to add is it's very important for us that your budget comes in as balanced, not showing a deficit and not showing walking away with, you know, a few $1,000s in your pocket. It has to balance to zero.
Okay, that's good advice. Anything else to add, Jessica?
My goodness, they scooped everything I was going to say. Don't be disappointed if you don't get a grant. So expectations, absolutely. Don't procrastinate. You know, both in asking us questions, because if you reach out to us the day before the deadline, chances are you're not going to get, you may not even get a response in that time frame, depending on how many questions we're getting in. So ask your questions early. Also, make sure you have your application done early. In our case, the application is literally shut down and it won't let you submit. So there's no point in spending hours working on the application and not actually pressing submit ahead of the deadline. And the other thing I will get caught up on my words, but I will reiterate, know your funder, know who you're applying to, know how it's being, your application is being assessed and what the assessment criteria are, and don't submit the same application to all the people here. It won't work.
Yeah.
And we share a lot of information about how applications are being assessed and those criteria. So look at those carefully, and the program criteria and what the priorities of the program are as well. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bit
Jessica.
of repetition, but important.
No, that's okay. We have an expression in our house, it's a steady rain that soaks, and sometimes you need to hear it many times. Listen, I just want to thank the four of you for an amazing hour and a bit here. We've been on the chat getting many thanks from participants who have been really enjoyed this and really found it very useful. So so thank you, the four of you. I know that this is certainly outside of working hours and all that kind of thing, so I really appreciate it. And we've had a good attendance here tonight, so that's fantastic. Thanks a lot, and I hope we all cross paths again. It's been fun.
Thanks,
Take care, everyone. Thank you all for joining in. And there's still chat stuff coming in, but yeah, thank you all for joining in, and good luck with any grant writing that you're doing. And hopefully that you found it very interesting and informative today. And please check out the Forest City London Music Awards website and see all the other events that are going on, the other amazing workshops, and also the great grants programs that are happening, or awards programs that are happening. And you know, sign up for some other things. There's some really neat stuff going on this week. So on that little advertisement, I will say goodbye and check out.